So hey everyone, want to thank you for attending our presentation today, where we, PCG, along with Think of Us, will present the findings and recommendations heard during our stakeholder engagement efforts. Please note that this presentation is being recorded and that it will be posted on the DS Settlement website following the presentation. The agenda for today's presentation includes providing an overview of the DS Settlement engagement efforts. Public Consulting Group will then discuss our stakeholder engagement methodology, our findings, and the recommendations. We'll then hear from Think of Us, where they will talk about the youth engagement efforts that they completed. Lastly, we'll go over DCYF's next steps relating to the work that's being completed in response to the settlement agreement. So first, I'd like to quickly introduce today's presenters. Katie Bright will not be joining us today, but I am Kate Smith, a senior consultant with PCG. I led the PCG team in completing the stakeholder engagement efforts. I'm joined today by Sixto Cancel, the founder and CEO of Think of Us, and Sada Fatala, a senior fellow for the research and co-founder of the Center for Lived Experience at Think of Us. To start, we'd like to give a brief timeline of the events that led to today's call. In January 2021, a class action complaint was brought against DCYF. As a result, in June 2022, an agreement and settlement order was issued outlining 8 key areas of improvement. PCG was tasked with obtaining live and written input from individuals with lived experience and professional partners regarding 3 of the improvement areas, which include kinship engagement, family group planning, and referrals and transitions. In February 2023, PCG entered into a memorandum of understanding with Think of Us, who then facilitated the collection of stakeholder feedback from young people. In March, both PCG and Think of Us completed all stakeholder engagement. And then in April, PCG, in conjunction with Think of Us, submitted the Stakeholder Facilitation for Systemic Improvement final report. PCG's and Think of Us's roles in these stakeholder efforts were to obtain written and live feedback from young people, parents, caregivers, including foster and kin, service providers, tribal child welfare, and other professional partners about their experiences relating to kinship engagement, family group planning, and referrals and transitions to services and placement supports. We then developed a public report that described what we heard as working well, areas in need of improvement, and recommendations to enhance these 3 areas. The report was issued on April 21st and is now posted on DCYF's DS Settlement webpage. So first, we'll talk about PCG stakeholder engagement efforts. This includes our methodology, findings, and recommendations as it pertains to parents, caregivers, and professional partners. To do this, PCG emailed over 120 individuals and organizations and met with 30 individuals within the state of Washington to spread awareness of opportunities to inform DCYF system improvement plan, to brainstorm how to recruit diverse stakeholders, and request assistance with distributing participant materials, such as informational flyers that contain the online survey link and listening session registration link. PCG's goal was to reach and provide as many opportunities as possible for individuals to participate by offering accessibility accommodations, language translation services, childcare services, and dinner. In addition, a stipend was offered to caregivers who participated in the listening sessions and/or who completed the survey. PCG held a total of 10 90-minute listening sessions. This was comprised of 6 in-person listening sessions held throughout the state of Washington. Separate in-person sessions were held for foster parents and kin caregivers from professional partners. These were held in Spokane, Yakima, and Tacoma. In addition, 4 virtual listening sessions were held. These were comprised of 1 parent session, 1 foster parent kin caregiver session, and 2 professional partner sessions. A total of 71 individuals participated in the listening sessions. In addition to the listening sessions, PCG released an online survey from March 10th through the 31st to obtain written feedback from parents, caregivers, and professional partners. A variety of question types were asked, such as multiple choice, check all that apply, and open-ended. Some example questions, we asked caregivers if DCYF provides you with any support and resources to help care for the youth, along with follow-up questions such as what types of supports and resources were provided and what other types of supports and resources could DCYF provide that could help you better care for the youth. Nearly 300 individuals completed the survey, comprised of 225 caregivers and 66 service providers. Due to PCG's outreach efforts, we were able to obtain participation from the specific groups outlined in the agreement and settlement order. This includes participants who reside in urban, suburban, rural, very rural areas, as well as tribal reservations. Caregivers cared for young people who identify as heterosexual or straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, and or transgender or non-binary. We were able to speak with caregivers who cared for young people who have a physical challenge and or mental or behavioral health challenge. Caregivers cared for young people who have resided in the same placement for over a year, lived in 5 or more placements, lived in a group home in another state, stayed overnight in a hotel or office in the past 6 months, and or those who awaited a clip bed. Caregivers included family, friends, and foster parents. In addition, some of the caregivers were those who the young person chose to live with, while others were not chosen by the young person. A variety of professional partner service providers were also represented in these stakeholder efforts, including those from education, child welfare, visitation, substance use, mental health, developmental disabilities, LGBTQIA+, housing, and legal. So now we'll talk through the findings and recommendations that we heard from parents, caregivers, and professional partners. The first area we attained parent, caregiver, and professional partner feedback on was kinship engagement. Pursuant to the agreement and settlement order, DCYF must establish a statewide kinship engagement unit that includes a family finding model to identify and engage class members, extended family members, and friends to support families in safely reunifying or staying together. The feedback we heard from parents, caregivers, and professional partners regarding kinship engagement was categorized into 3 themes. These include supportive networks, resources, and communication. The first we will discuss is supportive networks. We first heard from parents and caregivers that there are often delays in establishing supportive networks, and that at times DCYF provides caregivers with inadequate information about the young person's relatives and culture, resulting in foster parents conducting their own research to find relatives and cultural supports. Therefore, it was recommended that DCYF develop and implement policies and procedures to ensure kin and fictive kin are identified on the day of the young person's removal and throughout the life of the case, and that DCYF strengthen its relationship with tribes and continue to keep young people connected to their culture. We also heard from approximately 2/3 of our caregiver survey respondents that trusted kin are not always involved throughout the case. It was recommended that DCYF implement information collection and sharing practices and tools that gather information from young people and their families about their culture, support and resource needs, and allow the young people to make choices about their placement decisions. This last finding from the parents and caregivers ties to what we heard from professional partners, which the professional partners stated that they seek to enhance connectedness to families and extended family members by involving young people, families, and social supports in the delivery of services. Some professional partners indicated that DCYF supports these enhancement efforts by connecting professional partners to parent allies and providing parent contact information to partnering agencies. However, it was also noted that DCYF does not always provide ongoing training to social workers about resources available in connecting partners. The next kinship engagement topic we heard from participants about was available resources. Parents reported that DCYF often missed opportunities to provide time-sensitive information regarding parental rights, such as parents not knowing findings that led to the child's removal could be disputed, and that parents' rights to remain with the child while in a facility. It was recommended that DCYF ensure social workers are equipped with an ongoing understanding of Washington state laws, and that DCYF implements those laws into practice. In addition, only 1/4 of caregiver survey respondents reported receiving adequate supports and resources from DCYF to help care for the young person. Parents and caregivers recommend that DCYF help provide resources such as transportation assistance and gas cards, as well as information on local programs that assist with food, housing, clothing, and childcare needs. Specific resources and support should also be provided to LGBTQIA+ young people. It was also recommended to ensure children remain in kinship care, that resources and concrete supports are provided to family members as equally as they are provided to non-kinship caregivers. Professional partners stated that informational tools such as the Chipper, Chet, and BRS are useful. However, the Chipper and Chet are often missing or contain dated information. According to professional partners, DCYF should continue using these tools, however, update them frequently and allow input from the young person in care to obtain the most accurate and up-to-date information. The final section of kinship engagement is in regard to communication. The majority of parents and caregivers stated that the frequency and mode in which they communicate with DCYF, such as email, phone, and text, is inconsistent, some noting that it can take several days to receive a return phone call or that emails go unanswered. Parents and caregivers reported information sharing could be improved by social workers returning texts, calls, and emails within 24 to 48 hours, conducting regularly scheduled in-person check-ins with parents and caregivers to discuss the needs of the youth and to identify collaborative approaches to support the young person in their placement, being transparent when sharing information and providing adequate notice of court dates. Parents reported having good communication, engagement, and relationships with foster parents, including the ability to share religious preferences and family traditions. It was recommended that these positive practices continue, and communication should include information on any youth who is transgender or has different pronouns than what is indicated in the referral source. Professional partners reported in the past agencies and DCYF shared mutual information and maintained a common understanding of each other's role. However, now they experience gaps in communication. Professional partners recommend the following strategies to be utilized to help build communication. These would include professional partners having direct communication with the social worker or supervisory staff. Partners and DCYF engage in routine communication such as phone calls, emails, and meetings, and DCYF provide more timely updates on placement changes. The next area of the settlement agreement that we spoke with parents, caregivers, and professional partners about is family group planning, specifically shared planning meeting policies and practices. The first topic that we spoke with parents, caregivers, and professional partners about is opportunities. Some parents and caregivers reported that they received short notice, only 1 to 2 days, of an upcoming shared planning meeting, and that the meetings typically occurred either during the morning or afternoon. The frequency of the shared planning meetings was also varied, most often occurring once every 6 months. Most parents reported that they would like increased notice and frequency of the meetings. Parents and caregivers also reported that decisions were often made prior to the shared planning meeting instead of using the time to engage in multidisciplinary discussions. It was recommended that decisions are made through a collaborative process that includes parents, caregivers, and a multidisciplinary team. Parents also stated that they thought shared planning meetings are a good use of time when all parties are present. However, foster parents stated they do not feel supported during the meetings. At times, they are asked to leave if the parent is unable to attend or once they've provided an update. It's recommended that foster parents and the young person are involved in the shared planning meeting, allowing the young person to voice their wishes, especially as it relates to their identity, cultural needs, and well-being. Finally, parents and caregivers reported they are not always provided notice of upcoming court hearings, so it's recommended that parents and caregivers are provided adequate notice of those hearings. Some professional partners reported providing representation in shared planning meetings. However, those who did not attend the meeting stated it was due to not being informed of the meeting time or date, or the meeting didn't occur. Similarly to parents and caregivers, professional partners recommend that shared planning meetings occur regularly and adequate notice of the meeting is provided. Professional partners also stated that the meetings work well when there is a trained and prepared facilitator who allows open communication from all attendees. They recommended that DCYF develop and implement standard rules and guidelines across all shared planning meetings, and that there are clearly defined target items for discussion, goals to accomplish, and tasks to consider. In addition, each shared family planning meetings should have an assigned facilitator who has an experienced, family-centered, trauma-informed skill set and who remains a constant throughout the case. The last area regarding family group planning is their effectiveness. Parents and caregivers reported that a variety of topics are discussed at the shared planning meetings, such as permanency goals, the youth's needs, behavior, and placement. It's recommended that a multidisciplinary team be present at the meetings to thoroughly discuss the topics of the shared planning meetings. Some parents also express feelings of being isolated or judged at the shared planning meetings. So again, it's recommended that these meetings have an assigned facilitator who has an experienced, family-centered, trauma-informed skill set who is a constant throughout the case. Parents and caregivers reported that their cultural preferences were considered and respected most of the time, and it is recommended that shared planning meeting participants consider family and young people's cultural needs while making decisions about placement and services. Some professional partners indicated they do not always feel heard when providing their perspective. So it was recommended that an assigned facilitator is present throughout the case and that the professional partners who are not typically included in the shared planning meetings, such as school and transition supports and visitation supervisors, are also included in these meetings. The final area that we're going to discuss as it relates to parents, caregivers, and professional partners is referrals and transitions. As a result of the agreement and settlement order, DCYF will develop trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and LGBTQIA+ affirming referral and transition protocols. The first topic we heard about regarding referrals and transitions is communication. Nearly 3/4 of caregivers reported that they did not always have an opportunity to meet or talk with a young person in advance of their placement. So it was recommended that caregivers and youth be given the chance to meet. Caregivers did report that they felt prepared to care for young people with diverse needs. Caregivers recommended having a living document about the young person's culture, identity, and well-being that is informed by the young person and shared with the caregiver and other relevant parties. Professional partners stated that at times, referrals and transitions occur as a result of a crisis or reaction and are not always proactive based on the young person's individual needs. Professional partners recommend that social workers understand partners' roles and resources, and that cross-agency training should occur to ensure that referrals and transitions are in the best interest of the child. The final area that was discussed is about resources for referrals and transitions. Caregivers reported having to access their own resources to better care for youth placed in their care. It's recommended that DCYF provide foster parents with sufficient information on available resources to allow foster parents the time to devote to the children in their care. Caregivers reported there are helpful resources that are provided by DCYF. These include financial support, training, gift cards for gas and food, and daycare tuition, and helpful supports that are provided, such as visitation services, referrals to services, and translation services. However, these are not always provided consistently throughout the state. Therefore, it was recommended that DCYF provide resources and supports consistently throughout every region. And then finally, some professional partners reported that collaboration efforts take place with DCYF when identifying services for young people and families, while others express this is an area for improvement. It's recommended that agencies and DCYF are working together and that frequent cross-agency conversations occur. So now I'm going to pass it over to Sixto Cancel of Think of Us to discuss their engagement efforts with young people as it relates to the DS agreement.
I'm not seeing Sixto on the screen. Sixto, would you be able to hop in if you're here?
Let's see, it looks like he has his hand up, so we'll ask him to unmute.
Oh, sorry, I can't get on camera yet. I need permission.
Can you make him a co-host? Okay.
All
There
righty,
you
there
go.
we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Sixto Canto. I'm the founder and CEO of Think of Us, and we are a research and development lab that is focused on systemic transformation in child welfare. And I have to say, I can't wait to introduce you to Sarah. She is the genius around all the things that we do here around research, and excited, well, around the information she's going to say. But wanted to quickly just say a special thank you to everyone who helped us reach out to young people who were involved in the process, and made sure that we were able to reach the folks who this impacts. And so with that being said, I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sixto. I will share my screen so you can see my slides. You don't have to just look at my face the whole time. Hello, everybody. Thank you also, PCG, for laying the ground for this webinar and sharing your methodology and the findings and recommendations that you've heard from caregivers as well as providers and other stakeholders. On our end, we are going to focus specifically on the engagement process that evolved around young people that have experience in the foster care or kinship care system in Washington State. And I just wanted to give a sense of background around the topics of engagement. As PCG has sort of discussed earlier, the agreement specified a certain number of topics that this engagement should uncover, including kinship engagement, family group planning, and referrals and transitions. With that being said, this initial scope throughout our engagement process was complemented by additional topics and points of inquiry as they were suggested by young people themselves and other lived experts. So if you hear of other topics that were not a part of those three, this is the reason why. Is because during the virtual or in-person sessions, as well as in the survey, there was space for people to contribute additional topics that they felt were important to them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about who were the young people that were engaged to give you some background. We overall talked to about 69 young people, 21 through the in-person and virtual listening sessions, and 48 throughout the survey. We were really focused on trying to get a geographic representation across the state to ensure that we had folks from tribal, rural, suburban, and urban areas. And we were able to also engage young people who hailed from about 21 counties across the state, the list of which you can see here on the screen. And in addition to that, we also wanted to make sure that young people reflected a diversity of experiences, including folks that were from marginalized racial and ethnic backgrounds, young people who self-reported as being neurodiverse, who identified as 2S LGBTQIA+, who have cognitive disabilities and or who have physical disabilities. And the main eligibility criteria that we had is that in order to be able to engage in the process, you must have been 14 years or older and have been in the child welfare system in Washington State within the past 5 years, just to be able to help with the recall of the experiences. So I'll stop here as far as the background is concerned, and really want to spend the rest of our time going through select findings and recommendations from the 100+ recommendations that we ended up including in our report, and that we are very grateful for the wisdom of all the young people that they shared with us. These findings and recommendations are going to fall under one of these 6 sections. So the first one is about sort of entry into the system, how DCYF brings youth into the system. The second is around placement decisions and placement issues. The third is around engaging young people's families and loved ones. The fourth is specifically around youth agency and self-determination and how DCYF listens to and represents youth. The fifth is around treating young people with different identities and experiences. And then lastly, the sixth category is around how DCYF meets young people's needs. So let's dive into the first one. One thing that young people spoke of is that they felt like they were not receiving prevention services and an overall lack of a family preservation approach. This led to family separation when different supports and services could have prevented removal in the first place. And even when CPS reports were made, it did not necessarily trigger the provision of prevention services. I'll pause to give you a couple of seconds to read the quote that we heard from one young person before I tell you a little bit about what they recommended. So as you can see in this quote, one young person specifically spoke to the need for services around mental health and substance abuse treatment, but broadly speaking, young people expressed wanted greater access to comprehensive and tailored prevention programming to parents. Some of the things that they specifically named were housing, mental health, basic needs, financial support, easier access to and knowledge of resources, therapy, including substance use therapy, parenting skills and classes, including in jail, family counseling, immigration services, and healthcare. They also recommended to initiate prevention services for families who have been reported to CPS. One thing that we noticed is that young people's experiences with removals varied greatly. On the one hand, young people who feared for their safety raised concerns about their situation and felt that they were not being taken seriously enough for the removal to occur. And then on the other hand, young people who did not feel unsafe in their homes felt like they experienced unnecessary and abrupt removals that caused them distress. So you can see a couple of quotes that illustrate both of those perspectives. One young person said, when someone is getting abused, every minute counts. When they would say, it wasn't an immediate intervention, they sent me home only to get beat up for snitching. Whereas another young person said, I didn't need to be removed right then and there. That's something I didn't want to experience, being placed with other people, and that could have been totally avoided. So our recommendation is to really seek and honor young people's assessment of their own safety when making decisions about removals, and to work expeditiously to remove young people from environments where they report feeling unsafe, and then in non-life-threatening situations, delay removal until placement is identified to minimize disruptions and moves. Now let's talk about the second topic, which is around placements. Young people felt that their individualized preferences and needs for placements were not sought, listened to, or prioritized by DCYF. This lack of consideration for their own perspectives led to more moves and placement instability and risk causing further harm. From the survey, when we asked if their placement preferences had been considered, 48% of young people said no, and 34% said sometimes. 55% of survey respondents stated that their cultural, racial, and religious identities were not considered by DCYF when deciding their placement. And 43% of survey respondents reported that their gender or sexual orientation was not considered by DCYF when deciding their placement. So the first recommendation here is to ask young people about their placement needs to better understand and consider their histories, including past traumas, and identities, including culture, when identifying potential placements. Along with that, you should strive to place young people in their preferred placements. And if young people can't be placed where they want to live, to give them an explanation as to why. And lastly, we want to make every effort possible to reduce the number of transfers and increase placement stability, to increase placement stability, to reduce placement instability. Speaking around kin, young people who identified kin they wanted to live with voiced frustration that DCYF did not provide the information or support necessary for the kin to qualify as a placement option. I'll give you a couple of minutes to read through the quote that a young person shared. So here, the two recommendations are, first, to strive to place young people with a family member or trusted adult first, and second, to provide the necessary information and support for preferred placements to become licensed. One topic that came across in our engagements with young people is around placements in institutions. Young people described how being placed in shelters, facilities, and group homes caused them grave harm, and yet they were often placed there by DCYF, sometimes repeatedly. For some young people, simply the prospect of being placed in out-of-home facilities drove them to go to great lengths to avoid living there. I will read through one quote because I think it's quite poignant. One young person said, "The first out-of-home placement an after-hour social worker took me to was a shelter. I was extremely afraid and was refusing to go in. She called the police on me, and 2 white sheriff's officers showed up and dragged me out of the car and threw me inside the place. I got hurt. I was terrified. I broke a razor open and inflicted many deep cuts onto my wrist, knowing I would be taken to the hospital." It bears noting here that a recommendation that came fairly strongly from young people is to work to never place them in a shelter facility or a group home. And a part of that, they expressed wanting more tangible and intangible support to family-based placements to reduce reliance on shelters, facilities, and group homes. Next, we want to speak to how DCYF engages youth, families, and loved ones. Upon removal and throughout their time in care, young people experience severed relationships and disconnection from siblings, loved ones, and communities. Some young people noted that they were not provided with or allowed access to tools, including technology, that would enable them to maintain connections with their loved ones. Among the survey respondents, only 12% had received support to preserve relationships and address grief and loss after moving. Our recommendations here are to strive to place siblings together, to ensure that young people are able to maintain continued communication with family and loved ones by providing them with access to technology and concrete opportunities to stay connected, ensuring that placement providers do not prevent young people from remaining in contact with loved ones, and supporting young people in forming and nurturing relational support systems throughout their time in foster and kinship care. For the young people who were placed with kin, they lamented the lack of support provided by DCYF, arguing that caseworkers pushed for kin placements because it was a faster process, but did not consider the services that kin should receive to better care for them, or the benefits young people would have access to during their time in care. I'll pause to let you read this quote. So here the recommendation is to recognize that kin caregivers require additional resources that they deserve and need, and provide them with those resources. Some of the ones that were named by young people in the listening sessions, as well as the survey, were financial support, classes for caregivers and how to care for young people who are dealing with grief and trauma, mental health and counseling services, including family therapy, support with basic needs such as clothing and food, including food stamps, accessible and compassionate caseworkers to reach out to and learn about resources, legal assistance for kin to be able to get custody of the young person if that is an option that is desirable, access to healthcare for the young person, hair appointments for the young person, and more information and resources translated for non-English speakers. So let's talk about how DCYF listens to and represents youth. Broadly speaking, young people believe that the system is based on adultism, which is defined as the belief that adults are entitled to have control over and make decisions for young people without their agreement. As a result, young people found themselves in situations where they were not taken seriously or believed when they expressed their opinions or preferences, or even worse, when they reported concerns and grievances, including reports of abusive or harmful experiences that they had in placements. One young person said, "The reality is that they treat kids like objects. More trainings are required, make anti-adultism training mandatory for judges and caseworkers." And this relates to the first recommendation that we have here, which is to provide training on anti-adultism, sharing power, and decision-making with young people to judges, caseworkers, and DCYF staff. To provide channels for young people to share their concerns, including anonymously, and provide a timely resolution. To believe young people when they came forward with concerns, grievances, and reports of harm and abuse that they're experiencing while in foster and kinship care. And then to consult with the young person when responding to the harm and abuse they report to be able to ensure that they have agency in the process. When it comes specifically to family group planning meetings, young people also wish that they had been made aware of what was discussed and decided in them. Oftentimes, not knowing what to expect was anxiety-inducing, which resulted in some young people not feeling comfortable or prepared to attend. The young people who attended the meeting spoke to the fact that they had little say and didn't know why certain decisions were made. To that, one young person shared, "I wish they had a bit more communication with me. I feel like my grandmother and the adults were involved, but not me. And I feel like I was mature and I wasn't respected in the level that I should have been. I was out of the loop. I'm not sure if my anxiety developed because of that, but I have anxiety and it would have helped to not have all that uncertainty." The first recommendation here is to invite young people to family group planning meetings, as trivial as that sounds, and prioritize their attendance when planning logistics, including when they are available and where they could be available. The second recommendation is to explain to young people what each family group planning meeting is about and what decisions are to be made in each meeting. The third recommendation is to provide the preparation and support that young people need to attend family group planning meetings. And lastly, is to consider, prioritize, and respond to the perspective and requests young people express in family group planning meetings. When asked about their case files, young people disagreed with how those case files portrayed or described them, commenting how those files reflected the biases and subjective perceptions of caseworkers rather than the reality of the situation. And they felt that they didn't have power to defend themselves. When they were asked about the ability to tell their own histories, young people wanted the ability to review what was written in their case files. As part of the survey, only 12% of survey respondents reported that they had the opportunity to develop and verify their own history and information. So the recommendations here are to make efforts to center young people's voices and honor their requests as much as, if not more than, other stakeholders, and to offer young people the opportunity to review, respond to, and correct in writing the information in their case files. Moving right along to how DCYF treats young people who come from different identities and experiences and backgrounds. Young people, especially those who were neurodivergent or reported having cognitive disabilities, reported being subjected to sanism and neurodiscrimination, either by being ignored, misdiagnosed, or for those who have mental health diagnoses, by being dismissed because of those diagnoses. Young people also found that they were not taught about mental health in ways that could have been helpful for them to understand themselves and advocate for what they needed. One young person shared, "The foster system tried to diagnose me without actually taking me to the doctor. Like they try to get me meds for ADHD when that's not what I have. So they put me in a home with mostly ADHD kids and it messed me up." The recommendation here is to educate and train placement providers and DCYF staff to understand mental health and how it manifests emotionally, behaviorally, and socially amongst young people, as well as to provide mental health education to young people so that they can recognize and ask for the help they need. When it comes to cultural backgrounds, young people reported that their cultural identities, racial identities, religion, spiritual practices, language, and/or other cultural traditions were not considered in decisions about where they were placed by DCYF. This left young people feeling that they were disconnected from their identities and that the cultural norms and religious beliefs of the placement providers were imposed on them. One young person shared, "I don't know if this is something we could even legally do, but I feel very strongly that foster parents should not be allowed to impose religious or any kind of other beliefs on young people at all. If a young person is interested, then maybe. I think that a lot of foster parents are like, this is who I am, and this is who you're going to be under my roof." As part of the recommendations that were shared by young people, the first one is to provide robust racial equity and cultural competency training to DCYF staff. When living in placements that don't share the same cultural, racial, ethnic, and religious identities, provide youth with opportunities to stay connected to those identities and care for their specific cultural needs. Another recommendation is to place young people in placements that do not compromise their own religious practices or impose religious beliefs different than their own. And lastly, to offer and encourage educational opportunities for placements to become more culturally competent. US LGBTQIA+ youth reported being discriminated against in their placements or by DCYF staff. This included a plethora of stories that we heard around being subjected to or witnessing physical and other forms of abuse, particularly in institutional placements, because of the survivor's sexual orientation and or gender identity. Additionally, young people reported that their sexual orientation or gender identity were not considered in decisions about where they were placed, and that DCYF did not provide the right training to ensure that placement providers and DCYF staff were competent. One young person shared that they experienced a lot of transphobia from social worker, and they said, "To be honest, I don't really think they care about your gender identity, nor do they care about your sexual orientation too." The first recommendation here is to protect and support 2S LGBTQIA+ youth against queerphobia and transphobia from placement providers and from DCYF staff, to prioritize placing those youth in homes and communities where they feel safe and affirmed, and to mandate required and initial and ongoing training for placement providers and DCYF staff. As for our last theme, which is around how DCYF meets youth's needs, young people expressed that they did not have appropriate, up-to-date sexual education and that they wanted to learn more about sexual health. They also expressed lacking proper education on sexual assault and abuse, as well as on self-harm awareness. And they further wanted to be properly educated about drugs and harm reduction and have easily access to harm reduction supplies. One young person shared, "Don't get me started on that stuff. The good teachers, they can't show you condoms. He made a condom out of a sock. Until I brought it to the table, I'd never heard of dental dams or anything about queer sex ed. It really goes to show how queer young folks get into dangerous situations because of lack of education." So the two recommendations around this are to provide young people with ongoing education about and supplies for sexual health, sexual harm, self-harm, and drug-related harm reduction, as well as training placement providers on the range of young people's health needs and the health issues that they face. When it comes to housing across the board, youth stated that they were not provided with information about the housing opportunities that they had at their disposal in a timely manner, especially when qualification and eligibility thresholds, application timelines, and potential wait lists were taken into account. One young person said, "Every part of being in foster care should be DCYF enrolling you in Section 8. I didn't know about the FYI or IYHP programs until a month or two ago. And now I'm getting to the point that I'm aging out of extended foster care. This is something that I could have accessed from age 18, and now I'm racing against the clock. They told me you don't qualify for it, FYI, because you're not potentially homeless." The recommendation that young people shared was to inform and guide them towards affordable housing opportunities before they became eligible so that they're able to enroll as early as possible and be ready for those application deadlines, and to provide mandatory homelessness diversion training to DCYF staff. Overall, young people reported feeling unprepared for their transition into adulthood. and it felt like they were precipitated into an abrupt cutoff point the day that they aged out, after which they were left to fend for themselves. Sadly, young people were made to believe that they were being spoon-fed by the system. And this rhetoric or this mental model led many to untether themselves from extended foster care in an effort to prove that they could be independent from it. One young person shared, after leaving extended foster care, I was cut off from what felt like any little resource I had. I no longer had a caseworker to ask questions. My ILP, my independent living program manager, was gone. My funding was gone. I got no notice or help preparing for this cutoff of everything. I was not prepared when it came to housing, and to this day still struggle immensely to make half my rent. Young people recommended DCYF collect data on the needs of aging out youth and providing support accordingly. Some of the supports that they mentioned included financial support, including safety net funds for youth in emergency situations, financial education, housing support, parenting support and childcare, employment and career support, education funding, mentorship, life skills, a suitcase for personal belongings, and hygiene and care items. Another recommendation is to push against the harmful rhetoric that young people should feel bad or ashamed for receiving help and using resources from the system. And with that, I want to conclude the select findings and recommendations that I shared, but want to also invite you all to review the full report that summarizes the entirety of the findings and experiences that were reported by the young people that we engaged. The young people that we talked to shared time and time again their hope that their experiences and recommendations would not be ignored. I believe that some of them are here with us on this webinar. So we urge all of you to hear and heed their words, and above all, to take them to heart and to action.
So one thing I want to end off by saying here also is that I just want folks to take a quick deep breath, because I know you heard a lot in the last couple of minutes, almost hour here. And as I think about, the complexity of all the things that were brought, I just wanted to drop a couple of things that I want folks to remember, which is look, we work in one of the most complex social systems, right? That's what I truly believe about child welfare, and that we've inherited these systems. But I want to just put a special thank you out to the young people who shared some of their most painful moments so that we can learn here. But I also wanted to thank leadership and wanted to thank Washington too for wanting to hear exactly what were these experiences. There were different choices of how this information could have been surfaced. And I think that one of the most powerful ways to get information is to listen to those who are closest to the problem and who have experienced that problem. And so want to thank the young people. I want to thank Washington for actually leaning in that way. And I think this is a great moment to really think about, now that we have heard these things, and some of these things we may have already known, right? How do we then actually begin to work on these things and push it forward? So just a huge thank you to every young person, every person who participated in the interview, the huge thank you to each of the partners who reached out to young people. And then a huge thank you to Washington for being one of the leading states in the country to say, we're going to be brave enough to hear the information in this particular medium in a way that hasn't really been done before. And so that then we can go ahead and figure out, where do we focus our energies? So I just don't want that to be undermined either. So thank you to everyone for this particular contribution in time.
All right, thank you, Sada and Sixto. So now we will go into talking about the next steps as it relates to the work that the stakeholder engagement has done. So the recommendations that were discussed today during today's presentation have been incorporated into DCYF's implementation plan. Each recommendation is linked directly to the related section of the plan. So when you're reading the overview section, you can see there's a table where you can see directly where the recommendation that we discussed today is incorporated within which section of the plan. The final implementation plan will be posted to the DS Settlement website on August 2nd. You can currently review the draft plan. Again, that's located on the DS Settlement website. In addition to the draft implementation plan, you can also find information about the DS settlement agreement and the stakeholder facilitation for systemic improvements final report, which includes the comprehensive report of all the young person, the parent and caregiver, and the professional partner findings and recommendations. If you have any questions about the information presented today or the settlement, please email, or first you can check out the website, or you can email dcyf.dssettlementfeedback@dcyf.wa.gov. And again, we want to thank you for joining us today and throughout this process, as you were all instrumental in gaining the outreach and getting the engagement from the young people, parents, caregivers, and professional partners as it relates to improving kinship engagement, family group planning, and referrals and transitions. So again, thank you. And that concludes our presentation.